And when it comes to walking the walk, in addition to creating jobs and wealth here in Mekke, Wade has also had a school breakout inside her house. And you see the difference it makes to kids to have a safe, functional place to learn with lights that work. They've got the same sorts of hopes, dreams, and preoccupations of kids everywhere.
Dapat ajaran kaya. Lesila. Mamake damagoja kudotte. Mane kudotte damagoja nikmitales.
Je m'appelle Mohamed Wade, j'ai 15 ans. J'ai allé à Tuaon et à Pékès. Jouer des matchs. Mais n'est pas trop grand, c'est une petite ville. Bien parler l'anglais, parce que j'aime ce pays, le football.
Mawagan lin jungle.
Half of our profits are devoted to actually putting back into the school that, I think they saw over there. But that's my choice. That's what the difference, that's what people don't understand. We use capitalism, the free market capitalism, to make money. But then the way we spend our money looks very socialist in this way, We're giving half of it away, People can think redistribution, but it's voluntary. I decided to do it this way.
Welcome to the fourth and final episode of our program on the Climate Discussion Nexus documentary In the Dark, which is about energy poverty and with specific reference to Senegal and West Africa. And today we have with us in the studio Magatte Wade, Senegal-born entrepreneur, activist, and gadfly, and we're joined remotely by Crystal Smith, who's a former chief counselor of the Haisla Nation in British Columbia and a senior fellow with the Energy for a Secure Future, to talk about the grassroots solutions to energy poverty and related problems that are needed from Canadian Aboriginal reserves to rural Senegal and beyond. So thanks very much to both of you for being with us. And I want to start by asking you, Magatte, at what point in your career where you had a successful business going in North America and you were on the speaking tour and you decided you'd go back to rural Senegal to create a factory? What made you decide to do that, of all things?
Well, actually, my entrepreneurial journey started with going back to Senegal in a rural community to build a company. And the reason why that is because when I understood that people were packing themselves into little fishermen's boats trying to cross over to Europe in search for a job, oftentimes the boat capsizes and people are ending up dead at the bottom of the ocean. I thought to myself, we need to provide them at home with what it is that they're risking their lives to go find somewhere else. In this case, it was a job. So that's really the reason why I decided to create my businesses back home so that we could create jobs back home and that many people get the choice to stay home rather than try to migrate away. It was just that simple calculation that I made in my mind.
And Crystal, in Canada, of course, there's a lot of dismal stories about the conditions that Aboriginals live under and their history and too much government. But there are also success stories. There are ways in which people are taking control of their own lives. And how does that show us the way that there can be a better future?
I mean, the history in our country in terms of the living conditions on most reserves, in the sense that there's a way through economic development to be able to provide much of the similar situation that was just described in terms of providing opportunities at home, and that is through economic development, access through land, and creating an economy within our territories, in terms of being able to bring back some own source revenues to our communities, so that one, we're providing opportunity for our people to come back home, we're providing housing, but the revenues that are generated through these types of developments, such as LNG Canada, Coastal GasLink, and Cedar LNG, is providing the revenues so that we can start providing programs that meet the needs of our people on the ground at any given moment. For centuries, our communities have all often been dictated to as to how to utilize the revenues that have been set aside for our communities, and they particularly do not meet the needs of our people on the ground. So, in the sense of providing an economy, providing an opportunity, and seeing where there's that strength in your territory, it is essentially how to improve the quality of the lives of our people.
And one of the things, I mean, it might sound strange to people who don't live in Canada and know about the things that happen here, but 11 years ago now, a prominent campaign promise by a federal political party was to end boil water advisories on reserves. In most of the first world, you take for granted that you can drink the tap water, but on far too many reserves, you can't. Now, how can a reserve just fix its own water system, or can it?
I believe that opportunity. I mean, there's opportunity for people to live outside dependence on any level of government. Being able to take situations such as our housing crisis in our community, we felt it was that there was no other alignment in terms of being able to resolve housing crises or suicides in our community. So we took that as our main goal in exploring these opportunities, such as LNG. Communities that take the initiative to see where their strengths are within providing and aligning their community in moving forward that economic development agenda. You have solutions that are provided to you within the revenues that are provided through that initiative. So communities do have the ability to resolve the issues that are within their grasps.
And when we were in Senegal and I was talking to you about the factory, and I talked about you giving people jobs, and you said, no, that's not the right way to express it. And I think it goes to the heart of this whole business about people taking control of their own lives. When you hire somebody, how do you describe what happens?
When I hire somebody, the way I describe it is basically it's two parties. In this case, me as the employer, the person with the talent on the other side, for hire. For me, the way I view it is a simple exchange of value for value. That's it. That's it. There is no such thing as anybody's doing me a favor. My employee is not doing me a favor, and by coming and working with me, and I'm not doing my employee a favor by hiring them either. It's they've got the value, in this case talent, that we absolutely need in order to progress, and we have something that this employee likes as well, because it's a skill set, it's a need that matches their skill set. It's in the place that they want to be in, working for the type of company they want to work for. So a natural match just happens. And so for me, it's all about exchanging value for value. That's it.
Yeah. And again, I know there's stories, I think particularly out of British Columbia, and I think of the Oyster Use band, who have, instead of asking to be given things, have created vineyards, a golf course, all these kinds of things where, as Magatte describes it, it's letting people create. It's not bestowing things on them while they sit there hat in hand. And that's really how it has to be, isn't it?
I truly believe it is. I mean, think about how our Indigenous communities have been essentially left on the sidelines for many generations in terms of the opportunities that occur in our territory, not provided an opportunity for meaningful employment. And now that that decision is being made by leadership and our community and every community in Canada, essentially advancing rights and title and this reconciliation approach. It truly comes down to individuals deciding that they want a better life, and in the sense providing that opportunity to for that avenue and for that to happen. I think the most important component for our community is providing that opportunity at home. For far too often, our people have had to leave our communities to go to the lower mainland, such as Vancouver or Vancouver Island, to explore opportunities, whether it is training, university, or employment opportunities after university. We're trying to create that opportunity so that our people can go to university, gain that education, but come home and make our communities stronger and more strengthen our culture and our language. And the only way you do that is by bringing our people home.
Yes, which has an interesting parallel when we were in Senegal talking to Magatte about the fact that the countryside empties out, that people have to go to the cities unless there's this infrastructure in place and the opportunities, and including, of course, the power. So, too often when there's a problem, people call for more government, even when the problem is too much government. So, when we come back, we're going to talk about how, even when it comes to education, you think it's classic governments provide schools. It's actually freedom that creates opportunity. Welcome back. And if you in the audience are suffering from a cliche shortage, I've got one for you. Education is the key to opportunity. But sometimes cliches exist for a reason. In this case, because education gives young people the tools and the vision they need not to get stuck in old problems. And again, starting with the experience in Senegal, you created a factory, and one thing led to another, as it will with entrepreneurs, though it doesn't with governments, and you created a school. Now, how did those dominoes fall in that direction?
Well, all of us, we need to be equipped with the skill sets. And in this case, the school is not so much about the hardcore skill sets, but it's about equipping people, in my mind, with this sense of agency. So what I'm going after mostly in our school is instilling in our young people a sense of agency. What agency means for me is be able to think of yourself as the own actor of your own life, that you should not be sitting around waiting for others to solve problems on your behalf, and that every frustration that you have, however small or big, look at it as a problem that's waiting for its solution, and that solution usually will lie in you because you're the person who actually is being frustrated by it. So surely you need to believe that the solution is somewhere in you, and somebody else will have a solution for something else that bothers them. We each have different things that bother us. So for me, education is all about providing and instilling in young people a sense of agency. And most importantly, also helping young people learn the ability to learn. The only thing we can rely on going forward is change. Change is the only constant in our lives. And because of innovation and technology, change is going to happen faster and faster than ever before. So you and I, Crystal, we cannot possibly sit here and claim that we know what the future is going to bring. None of us knows. As a matter of fact, we don't even know what's going to be happening next year because how fast things are changing. So we can't, so young people should not rely on us telling them, oh, well, when this happens, then you do this. No, the only thing we should be helping them figure out is how to learn so that whatever gets thrown at them, they have the tools to be like, oh, I see. Okay, now let me figure it out. We need to teach them just that. So that's what my school is mostly focused on.
Yeah. And funnily enough, if the policy fairy granted me one wish in Canada, it would be a voucher system instead of state school indoctrination. Yes. And again, when you look at the needs of Aboriginal communities and the need, again, to get the sense of agency, no longer to be on the receiving end of history, but to be part of it, it's not just for communities, for the kids to get this education, but it's for the people in the community to become the teachers, to have the whole thing be something that is coming from the community and driven by its sense of what's important. So I would think there too that if you could just have one thing, and I'm not knocking the drinking water, but if you could just have one thing, it would be we get to control our schools.
I mean, I think it's from a larger context. Our people have been caught in this thought process, generational thought process of having a reliance on government, but a complete dislike for the government as well. It's a thought process of being independent and making decisions and trusting those decisions being made. A lot of the conversation happens at the leadership level. But what I often talk about is, that my leadership took transformation because I had 2,000 Haslam members that supported that vision and supported that mandate in terms of going after independence for our community, so that we were no longer, tied by red bureaucratic tape when we were trying to make decisions in terms of resolving issues in our community. It takes a community to decide what they want, and I often described it that I grew up with my grandparents instilling our culture, our values, and what we refer to as our Haisla law in our Haisla Nuyim. But I looked at my grandsons to be able to provide that opportunity and showing them that there is a better quality of life, that our culture, our language can coexist with Western ideology and be able to be successful. In being able to invest in ourselves was the biggest goal. And we're finding that I'm close to a year at not being chief counselor, and still seeing the progress in our community. I have an identical twin sister. We grew up in the same environment, same family, but without the resources to be able to learn our language and our culture fully within our school systems. My twin's now a teacher at our local community school, and to be able to hear her speak our language, you know, if that doesn't inspire our leadership in our communities to want to have this generational change, you know, I I highly encourage anybody to come into our community and see what we're investing in through these opportunities that our community decided was our future.
Yeah. And language is an interesting point because, as many people don't know, the main language in Senegal is Wolof, which is spoken in Senegal. And it is a very complicated language, and it's not really a ticket to anywhere else. And so, your school, you teach the kids French because Senegal is officially French, and then you teach them English because it happens that the world, it's the lingua franca. And so, you have this balance between how much do we preserve of the traditional way of life? It would be a shame if Wolof disappeared. But on the other hand, when we were talking to the kids about their ambitions and the bigger horizons, the kids who'd never been very far from Mekke, the kids who'd never been to the capital of Dakar, and the kids who thought someday I want to go to Korea. So you get this education that comes organically from the community lets young people see a bigger world and decide where they want to be in it. Whereas if you don't have that, I mean, you can't read and write, and we talked to some of the older people in Senegal could not read and write, they're never going to be anywhere except right where they are now.
No, not. But where your indigenous language matters is because language is just not a communication tool. It carries with it so much of your culture, of who you are, your identity, the starting point identity. So that's why, in my mind, it's very important. And in our school, the problem we have is kids are at home. Before they're forced to go to school, to the government schools, or forced to go to school by the government, whether it's private or public. What happens is oftentimes when they arrive in the school system, especially the ones who, go into from very modest background, go to the public school system, once they arrive, the minute they arrived, this kid is supposed to all of a sudden no more using the language that they grew up with, their indigenous language, the only one that they understand, that their parents understand because their parents are illiterate. So now imagine, if I can tell you in English, John, bring me this chair, you know what bringing me this chair means in your indigenous language of English. But now you come into this school because we're in Japan, and now I'm telling it to you in Japanese. Well, in this case, in Wolof. John, in Mississippi, do you know what I'm talking about? No, but you're the same brain. You know what it means. So we, in our case, are using our indigenous language as a bridge to all of these other languages. And that's really important because otherwise you're leaving too many kids behind because you got to have a starting point. And that starting point has to be your root language, but also carries your culture. And from there, you can springboard into anything else you want. But that's really critical. And oftentimes we are denied that in our public schools in Senegal.
Yeah, and again, for Canada's First Nations, very often the thing is that learning English, I mean, you do want to speak English, but if it's forced on you, that's a whole different matter than if it's something that you in the community look at how you want to live and say to yourselves, I think we better get that one as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my grandmother would also often tell me, in order to leave and to accomplish things, you have to know who you are as a Haisla person, and I truly believe that, as well as that your language is the key to your true identity. And we were forced to speak English. Our communities, that was the goal of a lot of the residential schools and a lot of the historical issues that our people experienced was to erase our culture, our language, and our identity, and assimilate us into um, Western society. And all of our people speak English. It's the reverse for us of ensuring that our people learn our language. We've had many of our cultural knowledge holders unfortunately pass away over the last 5-10 years, and the fluent speakers in our community are dwindling, unfortunately quick. So the investment of revenues to be able to uh, deploy technology resources and people to be able to keep that language, that cultural knowledge alive in any possible way that we could is the solution for our communities. So, and it's absolutely inspiring to see generations younger than myself that know the importance of it doing exactly that, and that are trying and doing their best to be able to keep that language and our culture alive.
Okay, now speaking of education, it's not just people who aren't like us who need to hit the books. So when we come back, we're going to talk about how the clevers, or what Conrad Black just labeled the Davoisie do-gooders, are especially in need of some basic schooling when it comes to energy, poverty, and how people can be able to have better lives. Welcome back. And as so often, it turns out that education isn't just something that other people need so they can be as wise as we are. Now, over the course of these 4 programs, we've run into a number of major misconceptions about the nature and causes of poverty that are especially likely to afflict people who consider themselves to be smarter and more woke than others. So, in this section and the next one, we're going to discuss those misconceptions, starting by freeing ourselves from the conviction that government is the savior. I mean, and this is this reflex in so many parts of the world, including in much of Africa, that if there's a problem, the government needs to fix it, even though actually on the ground, the government's usually the biggest problem.
Yes, this is the most, for me, it's just the one that makes me just sit and wonder. Why is it that people think that the solution is outside of themselves and into this big thing that is amorph called the government? I see it oftentimes in Senegal when people say, there's a problem with this. What do you think should happen? Well, the government should. And yeah. So what is very interesting is that I've noticed that most of our issues, in a way, actually are directly related to the government. And so why do people think the government is a solution to everything? I don't know. But where I have seen the best work happening is in communities where actually the government has completely abandoned them. And I'm sure Crystal could say the same thing, but I have found that actually for me, it is easier to work in places where the government doesn't even have time for us than it would be in communities where the government has time for us. So right now, for example, it's easier for us to work with young students that without us, you know that there is no future for them, rather than the ones who are like, oh, we're on track to make it to this grade, that grade, or whatever. So yes, that's what we've noticed.
You remind me of a story from Milton Friedman when he was in the 50s. He loved what was happening in Hong Kong with all of the freedom and prosperity. But he said to the governor, you should collect statistics about this to tell the world the story. And the governor said, if we collect statistics, people will look at them and demand the government do something about them. Right now, all they can do is look out the window and see how things are going. And I admit, as a non-Aboriginal, but when I hear people talking about the ways of the ancestors, as one frequently does, I think to myself, one thing about the ancestors is when they had a problem, they didn't go, could someone else fix this? Like, we need food. It was like, let's go hunt something, you know? This self-reliance is actually a very natural human thing. And in some ways, I think the reason people always turn to the government is it runs the schools. But really, it's just so important that people not sit around waiting for Big Brother to bail them out.
Absolutely. I mean, I with all due respect to any government official, I mean, coming as a community leader I have the utmost respect for anybody in those elected positions to be willing to take on such massive initiatives. But since stepping away from being the chief counselor, I'm on a couple of board of directors of companies. And it's often talked about around having a tripartite conversation between Indigenous communities, i- companies, and government. And I'm essentially saying, how about we resolve the issues with the Indigenous partner and the company, and then bring the government along for those solution-based conversations once we've developed that relationship. And essentially, taking that perspective from my years experience of working with our nation and other proponents, we would often come to a solution and leave a conversation with government to come along with us in our journey. There's a massive, and it can appreciate the bureaucratic process in such, especially for the federal government, being as large as they are in Canada. We know our communities best. Proponents are along for that journey for the most part in the relationships with Indigenous communities. Um, we have solutions, and for the most part, I mean, LNG Canada, Coastal GasLink, and what I'm extremely proud of, Cedar LNG, have provided those solutions and have gotten somewhere in their success because of the relationships that were established with our community and the other neighboring nations in providing solutions to the government as to how we can accomplish something so massive for our region and for the country.
And you prompt me to bring in something else, which is that we hear about hydrocarbon fuels in Canada. Oh, well, First Nations do not like oil and gas. But when somebody actually asks First Nations, instead of presuming to speak for them, it's an amazingly patronizing thing of non-Aboriginals going, let me tell you what they think. But when we actually say, what do you think? There's enormous support for these projects and for these opportunities that they'll bring, because this is what the people who live there know they need.
Absolutely. I mean, Coastal GasLink was the first project that was a linear project in northern BC that has been accomplished since the 50s, since PNG was put in, and to be able to see the active participation of the nations along the pipeline route from extraction down to our territory was absolutely valuable in the sense that they were a part of the process. They had opportunity with contracting, they had opportunities with employment, and continuing that success. The communities are now generating different levels of revenues coming to their community that they can deem to use the way they feel fit in a sense of meeting the needs of their people.
Yeah, and one of the things I've always so easy to solve other people's problems, right? I've always thought there's a great game you could play with your family and friends if you were tired of having them around, where you make New Year's resolutions for one another. But one of the things when it comes to things like, well, what are these energy projects a good idea, or what should happen out in the hinterland in Senegal? That it's the people who are actually there, who have a grasp of local circumstances, who are aware, like they get up in the morning and there they are in this village. And then, they have, as to the people we talk to, they have to go and gather all the firewood and so on. That this is to substitute the sort of abstract judgment that it would be a better world if there were no oil and gas, for the people who are saying, but this particular person here who I know, this real individual with a name and a face, they could have a job, and the feeling of meaningful participation, that it's really a strange habit to substitute this abstraction for what is actually happening to people, including why people leave the villages, or why, as you were saying, a lot of people, they feel like they've got to go away. And I'm not saying they shouldn't go away, but it's a shame if they feel that they have to because there's nothing there. I guess that just summed that up. But that's again, to ask people, should there be an oil gas pipeline, in the abstract isn't the right question. The right question is, should our community have this thing happen?
I think in the sense of the sensationalism that's been provided to Indigenous communities not supporting in the oil and gas sector. I mean, you know, our communities, particularly mine, has been in conversations with the LNG sector for many generations. And in the sense that in the 80s, our leadership designated a parcel of our own reserve lands as development lands, and then started the education piece with our membership. And I had said that earlier, that my mandate came from 2,000 Haisla members in the sense of what their vision was for their future. The key component was us educating our people on what LNG was and what it wasn't, more importantly, what it wasn't. Showing them the safety component, the environmental impacts, and being absolutely transparent and honest about every component of the project, to leave it to them to decide as to what they saw fit for our territory, and being able to collaborate on a different level with LNG Canada. I really showcase the success of what partnership with Indigenous communities actually looks like. And I've said, time and time again, that LNG Canada is a template and should be a standard in terms of how oil and gas companies interact with Indigenous communities. It's an absolute blueprint for success, in how we have these conversations to navigate and, to more importantly, to advance projects. The more Indigenous knowledge that, and for centuries, our communities have had knowledge of our lands, of our environment, and how to take care of our land. We have some of the most intelligent knowledge holders in our communities as to the timings that happen, that are in tandem with our culture. And one example is the Ulukin in our territory, and some dredging activities that had to happen with LNG Canada. And our input into that uh, dredging activity had to do in alignment with our Ulukin rights, in how we did not want the activity happening when the Ulukin were going to come back to our territory. Things of that nature, and the respect that LNG Canada had for our knowledge holder was, it took the project to where it is today. And having that, and being able to walk along with Indigenous communities as your project advances, is probably one of the most important components of success in Canada. And I'm not saying that it's going to be easy. It is going to be absolutely difficult. What relationship in this world is easy? It's going to take time, it's going to take work, and it's going to take respect. But being able to navigate those conversations is most valuable to any project and any development in Canada, whether it's the oil and gas field or mining.
Okay, so there's one big lesson. Don't wait for the government to do it. But stay tuned, because when we come back, we're going to discuss the other 4 key lessons. Welcome back. And as we wrap up this program series on the Climate Discussion Nexus documentary In the Dark, which is about energy poverty and with specific reference to Senegal and West Africa, we have 3 more major lessons that we need to learn so we can understand better and they can live better. Because the first one is the governments really ought to get out of the way. And then the second one, which Crystal covered, is when governments are involved, they should be enabling activity, not controlling it or imposing it. And the third of these lessons, and again, this has so much to do with the Western agencies coming in and telling Africans what to do, but it's not unknown in Aboriginal communities, is to abandon the savior mindset. Neither those who wish to do good nor those who have needs are well served by a mentality that undermines agency. I mean, it's so critical to human fulfillment is that we should feel that we are the ones writing our own story.
Well, on that one, I think this is one of my biggest beefs with foreign aid, government to government aid. It's because as people are the constant recipients of aid, eventually develops a culture of dependency. And so you're moving people away from the sense of agency that they need to a sense of dependency. And then once you're once you're well, rooted in that, it becomes really hard to get out of that. And for me, the sense of dependency also breeds something even more insidious, and it has to do with this sense next of resentment. I have found that oftentimes people who have a sense of dependency also become resentful. And those two together, it's just a non-starter for anything good to happen. And so that's the other part of the argument that I'm seeing.
Yeah, and again, we see this again in the Canadian context where um, sometimes non-Aboriginals say, well, look how much money the government spends on Aboriginals. It's an astronomical sum. Why on earth aren't they happy? And the problem is, and there's a lot of resentment on the other side, it's because we're not being enabled. We are being, to some extent, supported, yes, though not always very well, but not engaged. And that this is it's twice cursed. It's the opposite of Shakespeare's mercy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've seen it for generations in many of our communities. And, although our community has been developing own source revenue for the last 10 years, you still see some of that mentality within our own communities. And I truly believe that it's going to take, a couple, at least a couple of generations to be able to move past that mentality, because our people have been in it for so long, and being able to move it in a way that they feel a part of. And that dependency piece that was spoken about, it's going to take some time to move away from, and to be able to move away from that effectively. There has to be trust built within our community, and to have that mindset of, we have the ability as Heisla membership, regardless of the leadership. It's our voices that essentially determine what our future and our future and our future generations look like. And to be able to have that strength and that ability to voice your opinion is going to take a little bit of time to be able to navigate that, for sure.
Yeah, I remember hearing this when some of this happened with people who successfully defected from the East Bloc and they wanted to be free. But when they came to the Western societies and realized that they had to decide where to live and what job they do and so on, they did find it difficult. It was disconcerting after all this. Resented, but nevertheless, in a weird way, comforting. You should get used to the walls. And that the next lesson, which is I think is so important, and I just find it so infuriating with Western do-gooders in particular, do not impose things on other people that you would not yourself want imposed on you. Because so much of this Africans, they're, poor countries dependent on Western finance. It's easy to boss them around and it's fun. Oh, I'm assuming this savior role, but I wouldn't live that way. And if we in the West tell third world countries, you don't want what we have, oh, no, it's not really very satisfying. And then we get back in our jet airplanes. I mean, that's just so bad at a personal level, but also in terms of development.
I think if you think about it, I mean, once I was on this plane in Tanzania, a plane from from the US somewhere to Tanzania, and I was on my way to go to a TED Global to speak there. And on the plane, it was a smaller plane because we were like in Orisha going to the resort we were. And I heard these two women behind me, and one of them must have been German because I recognized her accent. And to this day, I can't tell you who they are because I made an effort not to look at them, because I really felt that if I turned around and spoke back at these women, maybe a fight would have ensued and the plane would have gone down. And if it doesn't go down, they would have arrested me at arrival. What I heard them talk about was how they have found a way to convince themselves that the indigenous people, I don't know what they think of when they think of indigenous people. Maybe it's these movies, Avatar, you think these indigenous people living in their la la land, living on fresh water and, the earth, and they were literally saying that they can't possibly like what we have because they look at their world as a world of stress. They look at their world as, why would anybody want to put themselves through this? So they're comparing themselves going to us on a Saturday morning to a farmer's market, and buying the little flowers and the little, meat, grass-fed meat, and they think that's what these people are living. Yeah, the grass is the beef is grass-fed because they don't have a means to eat, to do anything to this beef, and the vegetable is grown in the garden. So they're thinking, and I would hear them say, these people are happier living on subsistence farming. And when they say that, my blood was boiling. Do you know what the word subsistence means? Do you know what subsistence farming means? Do you understand the pain that goes beyond, that goes on with that type of life? Do you understand what that whole type of life means in terms of subsistence farming, and people should be happy with that? And they just thought, oh, so I want to just tell them, do not confuse your fantasy for being an investment banker and your fantasy around going to the land, to your secondary home in the countryside, and going to farmers market. Don't think that that's the life that actual indigenous people are living. And that misconception is very much there. And it has a lot to do with the way they view it and the way they look at indigenous people.
Yeah, and speaking of which, and we have to get to our last lesson.
I like to say we are their anthropological wet dreams, and that has to stop.
What non-Aboriginal Canadian would consent to live under the Indian Act with all its restrictions, including property rights? But the last lesson, and as I say, we're almost out of time, so I want to get to this. It sounds so basic, but it's so important. Learn from past failures. Look at what has been done and has not worked, and don't do it again. And so, quick concluding thoughts. What should we not do again?
You said it. First, we have to learn about history, and we also have to learn about human progress. Once you really are serious about learning from the past and knowing how far along we've come and what allowed us to do that, you will not make the same mistakes again.
Okay, and a brief last word from you too.
All right, absolutely. I mean, it's also what I'm thinking in that historical context, and not making the same mistake moving forward again, is for our Indigenous communities to take that ownership and to take that first step outside of the Indian Act box, and look at look at your grandchildren in the sense of, what do you want better for them? And it's essentially stepping outside of that box and taking that first step and that first initiative to re-strengthen our economies and re-strengthen our identity as Indigenous people. The opportunity is there. Every opportunity is there for our communities. You know, and a prime example is our Haisla community, stepping outside of that box. You know, I'm willing to have conversations with leaders that want to take that first step, and to talk about how we took our first ones.
All right. Well, there's so much more we could say, except we can't because we are out of time. But I do want to say again, thank you so much, Crystal Smith from the Haisla Nation, for joining us, and Magatte Wade, with all the experience and thoughtful analysis to help people understand this complex and it's very, very important problem.
Thank you.
And that concludes our program and our program series. Thank you so much for joining us for this in-depth look at poverty and how to fix it, particularly energy poverty, based on the Climate Discussion Nexus documentary In the Dark, Senegal as a Case Study in Energy Poverty. And thank you all for caring about the subject in the abstract and for caring about the actual people who suffer from it. So as I wrap up, I want to ask you please to continue to think about it and think about what we can do and what we should not do to help so many of our fellow humans to live the better lives that they should have and that they can have.